Welcome to Watch Mojo, and today we're counting down our picks for the top 20 scariest games of the last decade. For this list, we'll be looking at the most terrifying video games that were released between 2010 and 2019. Did you play any of these games in the dark? Let us know in the comments below. Number 20, Layers of Fear. Developed by the oddly named Bloober team, Layers of Fear is a psychological horror game that takes its cues and influences from the independent horror titles of the early decade. More on that later. You play as a mentally disturbed artist who is trying to paint his masterpiece, but who keeps getting distracted by puzzles and an ever-changing mansion. Like most psychological games, Layers of Fear places most of its horror within the mind and forces us to evaluate what is and isn't real. As such, it asks us to share in the protagonist's surreal experience, even if that's something we don't necessarily want to do. The persistent jump scares and disturbing visions don't help much. Number 19, Doki Doki Literature Club. This visual novel is not what it appears. On the surface, Doki Doki Literature Club wants you to believe that it's an anime dating sim about cute girls and good books. In reality, it is anything but. The game is actually an ingenious and ingeniously designed piece of psychological horror. It's very much a product of its time, taking enormous influence from the postmodern deconstructive genre that was hot in the mid-2010s with classics like Undertale. The horror comes from the game's distortion of reality and the player's increasing lack of agency. It continuously breaks the fourth wall and actively engages the player with some great interactive scares. It's both an intelligent bit of satire and a memorable horror game. Number 18, Subnautica. This is not a horror game in the traditional sense of the word, but those with thalassophobia, or a fear of deep water, will find more than enough to dread. Released on early access back in 2014, Subnautica attracted great attention for its unique, adventure-based gameplay. Players control the survivor of a spaceship crash who is forced to explore an ocean planet for resources. Like all survival games, Subnautica preys on the player's vulnerability and often puts them in precarious, even dangerous situations. And yes, it all involves the deep ocean. Whether it's being stranded in the middle of a pitch-black night or seeing a massive Lovecraftian monster sliding by underneath the surface, Subnautica will ensure that you don't go swimming anytime soon. Number 17. BioShock II. And speaking of thalassophobia, how about an entire city at the bottom of the ocean? BioShock 2 continues the story of Rapture. This underwater city was created by Andrew Ryan, who envisioned it as some type of objectivist utopia out of an Ayn Rand novel. Of course, things quickly went off the rails and we got the violent and insane world of BioShock. BioShock 2 carries over the dreary atmosphere of the first game with leaking walls, decaying buildings, and psychotic killers popping out of shadowy corners. The sequel also introduces Big Sisters, which are agile and speedy enemies that screech loudly while attempting to stab you with their massive needle arms. Basically, BioShock 2 is BioShock on steroids. Number 16, Lone Survivor. Independently created by Jasper Byrne, Lone Survivor is a wonderful piece of survival horror. Originally released as a Flash game, Lone Survivor expertly blends elements of horror, adventure, and puzzle solving, all in a gloriously styled retro 2D platformer. The game contains many different types of horror gameplay, both of the visceral and psychological variety. It contains more primal and classic elements of survival horror, like stalking through shadows, fighting monsters, and conserving ammunition. But there are also more unique psychological aspects, like staving off madness with sleep and befriending various hallucinations. It's like I Am Legend in video game form, and it is every bit as terrifying as that sounds. Number 15. Amnesia: The Dark Descent. The legacy of Amnesia cannot be overstated. It kickstarted the independent horror craze of the early 2010s, and its gameplay mechanics and general style were heavily copied throughout the decade. The game has you control a man named Daniel as he explores a dark and foreboding castle, solves intricate puzzles, and hides from deformed and nightmarish creatures that literally cause him to go insane. Never before had a game focused so heavily on sheer survival, and few have made the player feel so alone and vulnerable. You may begin questioning your own sanity by the time the credits roll, never mind Daniel's. It's a masterful example of the survival horror genre, and it remains one of the scariest games ever made. Number 14. Until Dawn.
H?
What's it spelling?
Hold on.
How's this happening? Are you moving it?
I swear it's just moving.
Until Dawn is one of the PlayStation 4's most unique exclusives. It serves as an interactive choose-your-own-adventure style of game, as the choices you make directly impact the story and characters. The story takes its influence from a wide variety of horror styles, starting as a creepy slasher in the vein of Friday the 13th before transitioning to a more fantastical tale involving Wendigos and Native American curses. Of course, much of the horror derives from the nature of those stories, but the stress of keeping your characters alive and trying to make the best decisions possible also adds an element of unpredictability that helps keep the game fresh and relentlessly nerve-wracking.
If you were faking it, you were doing one hell of a job.
I wasn't faking anything.
Number 13. Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria Simulator. Independent developer Scott Cawthon struck gaming gold when he released Five Nights at Freddy's back in 2014. The series instantly became a cultural phenomenon played by millions around the world, but the franchise went in an exciting new direction in 2017 with the release of Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria Simulator. As its name suggests, the game is an imaginative hybrid of business simulator and survival horror. All the hallmarks of the classic series are present, but the game also introduces some fun new elements, including the aforementioned tycoon aspect and a retro 8-bit art style. It also adds some much welcomed lore to the franchise and ties up some tantalizing loose ends. It's a must-play for Five Nights veterans and newcomers alike.
But more importantly, we value our commitment to atoning for past mistakes and tying up loose ends. Thank you for your participation.
Number 12. Metro 2033. Monsters, nuclear war, fatal radiation, the dark and dank metro tunnels of Russia, this game packs a lot of creepy stuff. Metro 2033 is based on Dmitry Glukhovsky's novel of the same name, which follows the survivors of a nuclear war who live underground in the Moscow metro tunnels. The game contains many memorable set pieces that work in some great bits of horror, but the highlight here is the atmosphere. It's one of the most detailed and horrifying game worlds ever brought to life, complete with some stellar production design and a smart incorporation of gameplay into setting. You feel every second of its apocalyptic gloominess, and it makes for a terrifying gaming experience. Number 11. Dead Space 2. Now, if you want to talk about viscerally impacting, let's talk about Dead Space 2. The Dead Space series is the medium's answer to the scary space stories of old. Space inherently makes for a terrifying setting. Not only is it seemingly beyond human comprehension, but there's literally nowhere more isolating. In short, it really gets the old imagination going. And not in a fun way. Add in some of the scariest necromorphs to date and some truly disturbing body horror, and you have the living nightmare that is Dead Space 2. We didn't think it could get much scarier than the first game. This proved us wrong. Number 10. Bloodborne. Arguably one of the most beautiful games ever created, Bloodborne delights players with its visual opulence while also scaring the pants off them. The settings are molded after old Gothic countries like Romania and the Czech Republic, offering up a classic Dracula-esque atmosphere of gloom. But that's not the only literary influence. Bloodborne also takes many cues from the writings of H.P. Lovecraft, complete with grotesque tentacled monsters and themes regarding the ancient, alien, and unknown. And of course, there's the traditional Dark Souls gameplay that masterfully escalates tension through its difficulty. Put simply, it's a masterpiece. Number 9. Darkwood. According to the developers, Darkwood takes place during the Cold War in an indistinct location of the Soviet bloc. A mysterious forest has sprouted up, which traps civilians and turns them into dangerous monsters. You play as the Stranger, an unknown man who rightfully wishes to escape the forest. While Darkwood contains scary and grotesque creations, most of the horror is mined from tension. The game has a unique day-night cycle. During the day, players are allowed to explore and gather resources, but when night falls, they are forced to hunker down in their hideout and survive by any means necessary. Hideous creatures and a dark forest at night? No thanks. Number 8. Resident Evil 2. Very few video game remakes are as powerful as Resident Evil 2. The original from 1998 is certainly a classic, but there's no denying that it has aged, well, horribly. Enter this stellar 2019 remake, which completely updates the title for a new generation of curious players. It carries over everything that made the original such a smash hit, including its wide variety of fun settings, unforgettable enemies, and terrifically tense gameplay. Nothing gets the blood pumping like running from the tyrant in a pitch-black police station. Whether you're experiencing the game for the first time or basking in the glorious 90s nostalgia, Resident Evil 2 delivers the goods. Number 7. Soma. Following the runaway success of Amnesia, Frictional Games released an underwater walking sim / puzzle game called Soma. It carried over many gameplay elements from their prior masterpiece, but placed a greater emphasis on narrative. Said narrative took major inspiration from computer games' artificial intelligence stories like 2001: A Space Odyssey, and raises some disturbing questions about consciousness and what constitutes humanity.
Your teddy bear could use some repairs.
Toby always breaks. He's top-heavy, so he keeps falling over.
It also contains a rich underwater setting that mixes grungy BioShock with some haunting elements of futurism. We guarantee you'll have a good startle the first time you see a human merged with a computer. The atmosphere that Soma creates is second to none.
This is
Yeah?
pretty amazing, right?
Number 6. Inside. Playdead's Limbo was such a success that the Danish Film Institute helped fund their follow-up game, Inside. Like its predecessor, Inside utilizes 2.5D gameplay and a unique art design to tell its cryptic story. Like many games on this list, Inside takes advantage of its moody atmosphere to unnerve the player. Playdead are masters at generating a tense atmosphere, complete with an intentionally sparse sound design and a shadowy visual palette. But Inside saves the best and scariest for last. In a striking climax, the player encounters the Huddle, which is arguably one of the most haunting creations in gaming. Its physical appearance and violent actions are permanently burned into the memories of all Inside players. Number 5. The Evil Within 2. Tango Gameworks' The Evil Within was a strong spiritual successor to the Resident Evil franchise, embodying many of its famous tropes and design elements. But its sequel was both a better and scarier game in every conceivable way. This is basically the Resident Evil game that never was.
You gotta be kidding me.
It comes complete with some impressive monster design, tense gameplay rooted in action and survival, and a scuzzy atmosphere that harkens back to the franchise's best locations. And yes, the story is a complete trip based largely in surrealism and nightmare logic. The Evil Within 2 is delightfully confusing, incredibly gross, and packed with fun survival action. What's not to love? Number 4. Alien Isolation.
Attention. Please remain calm and proceed to the nearest exit.
Finally, we got an Alien game in keeping with the first movie's tone. Most Alien titles have followed in the bombast of James Cameron's Aliens, and that's fine. But a lot of the franchise's fans were clamoring for a more atmospheric and claustrophobic experience in keeping with Ridley Scott's masterpiece, and Creative Assembly delivered. There are few video games as stressful and anxiety-inducing as this, as you are persistently hunted by the titular alien and left utterly powerless to defend yourself against it. Yes, there are defensive techniques, but most of your time will be spent cowering under tables or holding your breath in a locker as the alien stomps and sniffs around outside. We didn't think our hearts could beat that fast. Number 3. Outlast. Outlast helped define the independent horror surge of the early 2010s. Developed and published by Red Barrels, this game had you playing as a journalist who travels to a seemingly abandoned insane asylum to uncover truth about inhumane experiments. The gameplay is relatively simplistic, as it mostly consists of walking around, running away from enemies, and hiding under beds. Most of the game's mastery lies in its execution. It preys on our intrinsic fears of the dark, of being chased and hunted, and of being helpless against an enemy who wishes to do us harm. It's amazing what Red Barrels managed to do with such limited gameplay, and it helped revolutionize the way horror games were made throughout the decade. Number 2. Resident Evil 7 Biohazard.
Out the truth!
A lot was riding on Resident Evil 7. Resident Evil 5 was considered a bit of a disappointment after the masterpiece that was 4, and 6 was just, well, let's not talk about 6. Now taking cues from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Resident Evil 7 came barreling out of the gate, and it did not hold back. From the unnerving atmosphere of the Baker family residence, alongside disturbing boss battles and gruesome sequences we can't show here, 7 brought the scares, both psychological and visceral. There may not have been a familiar face in sight until the very end, but this game single-handedly brought the franchise back from the brink of extinction. Before we continue, be sure to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell to get notified about our latest videos. You have the option to be notified for occasional videos or all of them. If you're on your phone, make sure to go into your settings and switch on notifications. Number 1. PT.
I said, look behind you, like you're sensing some strange spell.
We may never forgive Konami for what they did to PT. If you've been living under a rock, PT was a playable teaser, hence the initials, for a new Silent Hill game. This could have been the greatest horror game ever released. Not only was it being co-directed by Hideo Kojima and Guillermo del Toro, but the demo alone was scarier and more impactful than most AAA horror games. This demo was a masterclass in horror, creating tension like nothing else and cycling through a wide variety of horror styles, each of which were well integrated and deliriously terrifying. It's a masterpiece of supernatural horror, and it will never again see the light of day. In the mood for more awesome gaming content? Be sure to check out this video here on Mojo Plays. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell to be notified about our latest videos.